So, curiosity, what kind of Harris gear was it? Like military type stuff that you were running before?
No, it was the regular commercial grade stuff, the RF3200. Now, it was regular industrial equipment, but the 3200 series was also in use down in Groton, Connecticut at the naval yard there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was commercial, but the military was also using that same model. And I think simply because it was HF, it was 160 through 10 meters, or actually 1.5 to 30 megahertz, because I could transmit outside the band.
Yeah.
But we had used that because at the time, as part of the renovation, when we had gone to the amateur manufacturers, there was never really a consensus about the specific technical specifications. And even the Harris was kind of pushing it. In my view, that the biggest issue we had with the Harris was the CW. Now, granted that the Harris stuff, the RF3200 series, transmit CW digital and phone, the CW was not ham CW.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, people were comparing this stuff to Tentex. And you're saying if it doesn't sound like a Tentex CW, it's not ham CW. And I have to give that to them, because when you would listen to the CW generated by this commercial stuff and the CW generated by amateur gear, there was a distinct difference. Now, granted, in terms of the FCC spectral purity, the FCC requirements, when setting the rise time and so on, yes, it fit. It was legal. It could be on amateur bands and so on. But I think it was more of this, feeling as to how that CW should have sounded.
Mm.
And when those Harrises failed, they failed when it came to the CW. They would generate CW by transmitting or by generating a 1 kilohertz square wave.
Mm-hmm.
That square wave was shaped. You had a nice sinusoidal curve to it, and then it was put into the audio sections and then transmitted. What was happening with some of these Harrises is over time, that shaping circuitry was failing. So when we would look at it on a scope, you start to see the nice rise, and then it'd be this spike, and then it would come down, and then when you saw it on the negative going cycle, you'd see another spike, and it would come back up because it was failing. And so that's how our signal began to sound. So between that and the fact that Harris was really trying to phase out the 3200 series, and the expense and the cost and everything like that, we decided it's time to go back to the amateur manufacturers. And quite frankly, when you look at this stuff here, you look at, like, say, the 7300 or even the 5000 or 590 or something like that, when you consider these manufacturers make equipment for military, commercial, industrial, aviation, maritime, there's no big difference. The architecture is still the same. The frequencies are different. So when it comes in terms of spectral purity, duty cycle, transmit TR switch times, stability, all this equipment meets it. And in fact, generally when I'm doing my frequency measuring tests to bring the equipment in, worst case, I think on one of my oldest radios, I may have to bring it in 10 hertz. Will the average ham hear that 10 hertz? Probably now, because of all the SDRs out there, they could probably see a 10 hertz shift. But compared to the old Harris stuff, I could never get that amount of accuracy out of it. Hmm. And so now this amateur equipment, just, it's leaps and bounds over the old Harris stuff. Okay. And I don't think I'd ever go back to commercial grade stuff again, because not only is this much less expensive, it's definitely less expensive, it meets all of our technical specifications. And it's ham gear. So the CW, for those who really enjoy nice, clean CW, I think they enjoy listening to that.
Well, you kept speaking of Harris in the past tense, but I noticed that the leftmost rack still said Harris on it. Oh,
there's a reason for that. The racks were donated by Hammond Corporation, the guys up in Canada. And the club there, the Hammond Amateur Radio Club, in addition to donating the racks, also put the Harris placards on there. And I'm not sure what they used, but I cannot pull those things off without damaging and without damaging the rack. They're on there, industrially mounted on there, so I can't pull them off. So that's why it says Harris, but there's no Harris stuff in there. And really, that is the only reason. Those things, I'm actually going to bring it over so you can see it. These, there's a pipe. These are on to stay. And it's not glued, it's mechanically attached to it. So it's really kind of funny because to this day, I have some excuse me. Gotta remove my tether. Because it says Harris, some hams still look to see where is the Harris equipment. But that's the only reason. I cannot pull those things out without damaging them.
Are the transmitter room, is it temperature controlled?
Yes, that's why normally we keep the racks closed. This actually has its own air conditioning system. It's a 2.5 ton system, and it's set to go off when the temperature reaches 74 degrees. And the 74 degrees is kind of a holdover from the Harris stuff, because Harris Corp had recommended a specific operating range. It was like from 68 to 80. And so they said, but a 72, 74 degrees was an optimal range. And for the equipment here, just the regular amateur radio stuff, that seems to be a happy medium as well. In my view, keeping the equipment happy in terms of its temperature, the load they're transmitting into, the line voltage coming in, all those things, keeping the equipment happy is what gives us the longevity. But yes, this does have its own air conditioning system. And that's why normally we keep those closed when the transmitter is running, because even in the dead of winter, it will get warm enough in there to kick the system on. The only difference is we toggle the compressor on and off so the thing doesn't freeze up in the wintertime.
And through KDC, can you describe some of your feed line? I would imagine it's a lot of hardline or heliflex that go from the transmitters up to the antennas. Remember?
Yes. Yep, we have Andrews half-inch ARRL line going up the towers, and they terminate at a coaxial pigtail, in which case I'm now using a LMR 400 for the pigtail going to the antenna. Regardless of the antenna itself, if it's fixed or rotatable. We have the Andrews half-inch that goes all the way down the tower legs. They're secured each tower leg. Those go into our antenna boxes. Now, I have large antenna boxes about yay big with a 4-inch conduit going into the ground. The hardline will actually, we were talking about that with the repeaters a little bit, but the hardline will actually kind of make this big, long, lazy loop into the box. And from there, I have a coaxial pigtail that connects it to a polyphaser. I have multiple polyphasers on bus bars mounted to ground planes. And that ground plane is connected to its own ground rod, in addition to each tower leg having its own ground rod. From there, there's another small coaxial pigtail, depending on whether I can get a bend or not, to another section of half-inch Andrews hardline, the heliax, which goes through underground conduit into the basement. From there, they meet into a very large panel, a very large ground plane, where I have UHF and N-style bulkhead connectors. And in this case, the hard line will actually come in and make a very, very lazy slope right into this ground plane. We do have enough clearance. From that point, we're now using a combination of RG213 and LMR 400 to bring all those antennas up into the patch panel here. Now, I have to say RG213 because during the renovation, you couldn't necessarily find LMR 400, so we were using RG213. We didn't use 9913 a lot for obvious reasons, but every time I replace cables now, I just go with LMR 400 Ultraflex. There are only 1 or 2 instances where I'm actually using LMR 400 to go out to a tower. And that could be because the antenna isn't necessarily critical. It's probably not used for my visitor operations or my broadcast side. It just may be a receive antenna or something like maybe for my APRS or something like that. But generally, everything coming out of this building is going through to the towers through half-inch hardline, the heliacs.
Yeah, I was surprised only half-inch. That's pretty small. Okay, thank you.
And we're fortunate because everything is really close. Now, if I were to somehow put something up at 2.4 gig or something of that nature, I would probably go at 7/8, or if it was recommended. And that I actually go to Zach Lau, W1VT, who's our senior lab engineer on that. His opinion on the size of it. If it was something really, really high in frequency, ultra high microwave, then I would go with something bigger. But because everything is just so close, I can get away with using the half-inch.
Do you actually do you add bandpass filters on your transmitters for the broadcast? So each one's kind of prevent intermods from one transmitter into the other and things like that sort, or not?
I don't on there, no. But so for the broadcast side, I do not. I do, however, in the racks, have high-powered bandpass filters that I would use for the visitor operations.
Okay.
And one of the issues I found is that some of the filters, I'm using the 403As, especially on 80s, I don't get the bandwidth out of them. Because for example, on 80 meters, I'm at 3581 and 3990. They're high-powered contesting bandpass filter, which is one I would need, has a skirt at like 3880. So when you're looking at that 3 dB point, it's pretty good, then it just kind of goes, it drops. So when I wanted to use that for 80 meters, the SWR was through the roof because as far as the transmitter was concerned, it didn't see an antenna. So the big issue I'm having is just the bandwidth I can get out of these filters.
Do you have a common ground at the station, or are the ground rods of the towers connected together?
No. I do have, each tower has each leg individually grounded to its own 8-foot ground rod, and I put every one of them in. So each tower has its own ground rod, so each tower leg is grounded. The ground planes in the tower boxes have their own ground rod that they're running through. We run number 4 solid copper. The building has 2 8-foot ground rods on either side of it, and they're connected with a single run of 2-inch copper strap. That copper strap is connected to our utility ground and the water, the regular water. The ground plane down in my cellar is also connected to that ground as well. From that point, we have 1-inch copper straps going down and bonding to that 2-inch strap, and that goes to a bus bar in back of each one of these desks, and every one of the radios connects to that ground as well. I don't have the towers connected in other words, like my south tower is not connected to my north tower because it's physically difficult to do that. And plus, in my view, I'm introducing just a lot more wire in there. So I'm introducing a lot more impedance, and I'm actually raising that possibility of a potential above ground. So that's why each leg is powered individually. I do not daisy chain them for that same reason. And I know there's opinions. There's opinions on, well, should they be daisy chained? Should they be individual? And there's arguments on both sides. The one I use is if I daisy chain them, I've now introduced inductance, additional inductance. I don't want that. I want the shortest path to ground that I can get from each one of those tower legs.
Question about your generator.
Yeah.
You said it was 60 kW. I just wonder what make it is.
It's a Kohler. And it was in Kohler, it was installed in 1989 as part of the station renovation. We have an automatic transfer switch that is always monitoring the line voltage, and it'll usually kick in about 10-15 seconds after we lose power, because unfortunately, sometimes Newington is notorious for losing power. Where the substation that feeds this area here is located in an area called Mill Pond. It's located near a pond, and what's in ponds? Ducks, geese, swans, squirrels, and on occasion these poor critters tend to fly into the substation, and well, we hear the boom, power goes off, our generator comes back on. But that generator, the 60 kilowatt, feeds just W1AW. It does not feed main ARRL headquarters. And it exercises every Wednesday for about an hour. I can also manually switch over to it. And we will do that usually during field day. If we're gonna run as a Class F4 field day, I'll switch it over to the generator for a while. But also just to make sure that it's still working and that it still supplies power to us. But it is a 60 kilowatt Kohler.
How many hours are on it? Do you know?
Oh gosh. Let's see, 89, 99, 2009, 2019. So it's got 32 years, generally once every Friday, at least a couple of hundred hours. As you know, it has the counter in there. And I can't tell you when I looked in there last to see how many hours on it, but I would have to say at least a couple of hundred hours, given that it does exercise once a week. There have been times when we've been without power for a couple of hours, and we will actually, again, just switch over to it, but definitely a couple of hundred hours on that generator.
This is my K3MT on your generator. What's the fuel burn rate and how many hours do you keep on site?
We use number 2 diesel, and we have a 250-gallon reserve tank, which is in the ground. There is a 10-gallon day tank, which is feeding that and normally keeps it primed. As for the fuel consumption rate, that one's a hard one. That would be something that probably our building manager would know. I'm sure that information is probably kept on the day tank. We can actually measure the flow, but I wouldn't actually know what that is offhand.
I'm wondering how you transcribe text into Morse code symbols for your code practice sessions.
Well, for the practice itself, as you know, we take text from QST. And you probably saw him walk behind me. That's Scott Gee, W9RRU. He is the night operator here. And he will take that text from our production department. Once QST goes to bed, he'll take that and massage the data. We run a program that actually will count the number of lines for us and take specific sections of text out for each speed. So it kind of calculates how long, say, 5 words will be. Those are saved into text files. Those text files are then saved onto the network, where our program FLDigi will actually read those text files and then just transmit it. What we do have to put into them are the control characters. So the program itself and FLDigi knows when to send an AR or an AS or a BT, but that's pretty much all done by computer. Prior to that, and Scott remembers these days, it was kept on, what were they, Honeywell 38s, the large, what were those, 8-inch discs? And prior to that, it was actually paper tape, but it's all done on computer now.
So this is Brendan Cam for HRR. Great presentation. Thank you for taking the time to do that. You had mentioned you were sharing packet weather data. What's the source of the weather data?
We are using the Davis weather system, and that's the, well, actually, I can bring it right over again. It's the Vantage View. It's right there. And I actually have 2. You'll see another Vantage View right up here. This is the one where it's located on my satellite tower, and the temperature sensor has to be replaced. But I'm using this one, which is the sending unit. It's wireless. Let me just get back into the frame here. So I do have 2. The first one, which is my normal station, which is wired, is located on my satellite tower. So that's got the anemometer, wind direction, temperature. It's got the rain collection plate. But the temperature sensor failed in that. So until I can get that replaced, I'm using another Davis system, the Vantage View Pro, where the sending unit is actually located on a pole on main ARRL headquarters.
Gotcha.
So that data is being taken in, and we were feeding it to a WinAPRS. And right now I'm using Pinpoint. So I should have corrected myself when I said through CWIX, it is going up there. Through APRS, I'm actually waiting for the pinpoint guys, because I already let them know that we want to beacon our weather specifically through APRS. So it's not being picked up directly through our APRS transmitter on 144.39, rather it's being picked up like through FindU and so on.
Sure.
But we use the Vantage View.
Excellent. Thank you.
So Dean, KK4DAS here. I got a question for you. So
Yes.
I am the chairman of our maker group here, which is our homebrewer crew. And while I love seeing all the commercial gear behind you, it doesn't look like amateur radio to me. I like homebrew gear, that's stuff that we build ourselves. Is there any place in W1AW where that has a home, where people who actually build their own gear have a place to experience, radio at W1AW?
Well, I think I know what you're asking. Yes, all that stuff back there is commercially produced. However, the keying matrix, which we use to receive keying signals from the computer, was designed and built by the lab. The audio interface, it's a 16-channel passive distribution system. I had built that, so that's homebrew. All of the audio and PTT and CW interfaces for all the various radios that have it, I actually built those in-house, so we don't buy commercial that way. Other than that, some cables, some small adapter systems, we will build in-house. Other than that, everything else is pretty much commercial grade. And there is a reason for that. While if I can build it and use it here, I will. But the fact that I also have to make sure that I have stuff that's not going to fail, that I would probably go with a commercial.
Oh yeah, the rigs that have to be up 7x24 absolutely makes sense. You're running broadcast rigs. But one of the things that our club is trying to do is kind of reinvigorate the kind of homebrew aspect of amateur radio. And it's one of the things I'd like to see the league promote more and less of the commercial work. Well,
it's my understanding that through our lifelong learning, that is one of the things they're going through. I'm not sure if we're actively partnering or we are partnering with the Maker Faire folk. We had taken on a receiver project that is part of our lifelong learning, to have especially younger people get an actual hands-on feeling of building their own stuff. I mean, obviously, yes, the printed circuit board's already designed. They have to populate the board and so on, but they do have to calibrate it a little bit. So there is that aspect of actual hands-on home brewing and building as part of our lifelong learning. At this side of it, you probably wouldn't see that as much as you would say outside in the field where you're going to get that.
I guess your stuff in your lobby, though, was homebrew, right? The old 80-meter transmitter?
Yes, that was all homebrew. That was actually built by, well, I imagine that probably George Hart had a hand in that. But that was all homebrew equipment, yes.
This is Bill, W2WC, and I have a question about back in the good old normal days. How often did you have guest operators? Did they show up generally almost every day? Or in other words, was it hard to get to be a guest operator in normal times?
Not really. I mean, like everything else, we're seasonal. So there'd be times in the winter that if I had 2 or 3 visitors, that was a lot, but that was expected. We didn't start to see the visitor count tick up until around Dayton, because people are traveling, and actually probably in late spring. People are traveling, they're out and about, so they would make an effort to come here. And so we would see visitors during late spring, summer, and early fall. Every week we would have visitors here. But again, it was all seasonal. With the exception of when we would have large groups come in, and we would have groups that would schedule to come in, it was fairly easy to get on the air. Now, there were times when I might have a visitor on, say, 20 meters, and they're going to town, and I'd have another visitor here that maybe they had a sched with someone on 20 meters, I wouldn't necessarily break into that first operator. I would just put them on a different band, and that more than sufficed for it. But generally spring, summer, and early fall, we would have visitors every week and almost every day, even if it was one visitor or two visitors. Generally, my busiest time was that week between Christmas and New Year's, and to a slightly lesser extent, the days leading up to Thanksgiving, because everybody was out and about, everyone was traveling.
Two quick questions. One, people that come there to operate, do they get any kind of a certificate for having been to W1AW? And second question, I know your call has been used like W1AW portable for W1AW for different events and things. Do you ever loan that call out for clubs to use?
Well, answer the first question. Again, Harry, thank you very much for this opportunity. I know this has been like 3 months in the making, but I thank you for this opportunity. But first off, yes, we actually have a visitor's operator certificate that we offer to visitors. And I have to be specific about that because it's visitors. There's actually a little checkbox that says whether or not you operated. If you operated, it says operated. If you're just visiting, it says just visitors. So we do have that. In terms of the use of the call, as you may know or recall, back in 2014 during the centennial, the call sign was given to clubs in each one of the 50 states and US territories. That was an exception. Normally the call sign, the W1AW call sign, is allocated for use during ARRL sanctioned hamfests and conventions. And by that I mean, I know you were talking earlier about, Bill was talking about it, about conventions and the hamfests and the differences. Well, if it is a large ARRL convention, division convention, or if there's no, say, division convention, if it is a ARRL sanctioned convention, and that's the big thing, it's got to be ARRL sanctioned, and the club is willing to do it, then yes, I will grant permission, authorization to use W1AW. So that does occur. We don't normally just give it out for just regular, say, smaller state conventions or to clubs for that reason, in part because we want to be specific as to why the call sign is being used. The only other exception to that rule is during IARU. Because the ARRL is an IARU society member, she's a sister in the large RU society, ARRL is a multiplier. So the call sign itself has to be active from any particular zone in the case of IRU. So in those cases, the call sign is given out to large DXing clubs or really active individuals who have major contest stations, because the station as a multiplier has to be on the air simultaneously on multiple bands.
This is John K4YMA. I have a slightly different question. Most of our hams live in neighborhoods. So does W1AW. How's your relationship and where do you get feedback from them?
Knock on wood, it is actually very good. There's mostly cable fiber through here, so I really don't have any complaints anymore. Now that being said, a number of years ago, there was a major complaint that we had. Long story short, the problem was on the pole. When we finally got the cable company out here, they found that the connector that they were using had failed. The weather stripping was gone, it was green, it was loose, so there was your diode. So every time we started transmitting, we wiped out the poor woman's television. But overall, I haven't had any issues with the neighbors. On occasion, I may get someone calling up or saying you're coming over to my computer speakers or something like that. What we will do is I'll actually grab one of the lab guys, and if necessary, we'll go over there. I'll bring a couple of ferrites with me. We'll wrap the lines. We'll wrap the wall wart if they're using one as a show of just being a good neighbor to keep down that interference. And that usually does the trick. But again, overall, I have a very good working relationship with the neighbors here. And in the past, they know that if there ever was an issue, they can just come by the door or call us up and we'll try to help them resolve it.
What was the field day operation like up there last year?
Field day hurt last year. I got to say it hurt because normally I would have staff here and I wasn't allowed to. Now I was the only operator here. We did do the field day bulletins, but when I wasn't doing the bulletins, I was active on the air and I was the only operator because I couldn't bring other people in here. Yeah. And it was very strange because normally I would boast these high scores for this operating event in field day because I would have 2 or 3 staff here active simultaneously, and we couldn't. So that was the one thing. What was also funny, I was actually talking to Paul Bork, he's our contest manager. He remembers he's now getting stuff ready for field day this year already. It's still only March, but we're actually doing that now. He remembers he just got the job and he was thrown into the deep end of field day and during a pandemic. So you can imagine just what he was hit with, because now you had all these questions about, well, okay, can you operate? Can you not operate? There's restrictions. Everyone's going to be a D station now because they're not going to be out in the field. So it was really weird. But field day last year, and I participated from field day here, I can say with a straight face for a couple of decades, was not the same field day. And I'm hoping it changes this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Joe, I've really appreciated this. I think everybody here has appreciated this. I don't know if there's any other questions laying in wait, but it's almost 9:45. So hopefully you've enjoyed this as much as I think we have all. This has been just wonderful. So I want to say at the very least, if even if other people ask questions after this, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time for us this evening. This has been wonderful. I know I've learned a lot, and hopefully the rest of our membership has, and hopefully you've gotten to see what Vienna Wireless is and what we are all about too. I mean, hopefully it's a little bit two-way. So.